The task of choosing a keynote speaker is a daunting one. You must find someone who's accomplished, a leader in the field, but also someone who will engage an audience of educators while conveying an innovative yet affirming message. And Marty Abbott is just that person. Marty Abbott is currently the Executive Director for the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, ACTFL, an organization of more than 12,500 educators devoted to the improvement and expansion of the teaching and learning of all languages at all levels of instruction. Her career began in the Fairfax County Public Schools of Virginia, where she was a language teacher, foreign language coordinator, and director of high school instruction. She has served on national committees to develop student standards, beginning teacher standards, and performance assessments in foreign languages. She was president of the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages in 2003, chair of the Northeast Conference on the Teaching of Foreign Languages in 1999, and president of the Foreign Language Association of Virginia in 1996. Marty was also co-chair of the National Public Awareness Campaign in 2005, the Year of Languages, and now heads up ACTFL's National Public Awareness Campaign, Lead with Languages, which will launch this year. She holds her BA degree in Spanish with a minor in Latin from the University of Mary Washington, with a master's degree in Spanish linguistics from Georgetown University. It is with great, great pleasure that I welcome Marty Abbott to the podium.
Good morning, NYSAFLT. Good morning. Finally, the best laid plans. I had the whole PowerPoint, as you know, going earlier, but always a complication. Just like the advanced level competence in languages, you have to deal with the complications. So thank you, Mike. Well, it's great to be here. I don't know what all this talk is about Southern hospitality, because I have felt so warmly welcomed into the NYSAFLT family, and I want to thank all of you. I do have a chance to go to many state association conferences, and I can tell you that the services that NYSAFLT provides, the advocacy support that you saw with Diana Zuckerman and Barb Patterson, the other scholarships that are available, all of the kinds of support that you get being a NYSAFLT member are really unparalleled around the country. So I do want to do a special shout out to NYSAFLT for being an incredible state organization, and all of your 100 almost years of history. ACTFL is only half that age. ACTFL will turn 50 in 2017, and NYSAFLT, of course, 100 years old in 2017. You have such a rich history of contributions to the profession by so many well-known people, and I can't even begin to list all of them, but I have been so inspired by your campaign for the 100,000. I am going to make a personal contribution in honor of my dear friend Harriet Barnett. And I want to thank Marie and Francesco and John and Bill and Ken and everyone who really helped me get here to this conference. I want to apologize for the professional photo that I had to submit at the last minute. They said, oh, we're just going to do a few touch-ups. They airbrushed the heck out of that. And then on top of it, I had a little oh yeah, Ken told me that I actually subdued an unruly person on the flight here who was speaking out against language education. No, actually it was a little eye surgery, and I'm fine, but I'm sorry to have to wear it today. But it is great to be here, and of course I'm very excited to speak to you about some very important topics that we face as a profession. And so what I'm going to do this morning is do some information at the bottom-up way, starting with our students and some of the things that they're saying about their language education, work it up through the classroom, and then come up to some of the national initiatives that are going on, because I personally believe very strongly that we're at a tipping point in this country, and that finally people are starting to wake up. And I'm excited to tell you about some very important national initiatives that I think will start to secure us in the forefront, not only of the curriculum, but in the eyes of policymakers as they work through various issues. I will share this PowerPoint with John Carlino, so you don't need to try to write anything down today, but I wanted to start with a survey that we do twice a year. Many of you probably participated. It's with the National Research Center for College and University Admissions, or My College Options, and they allow us to ask a few questions about language education to the students and also to the teachers so that we can get some valuable information to inform us about policies that we're working on. So this is the recent, very recent 2015 survey where we have responses from almost 70,000 high school students. And you can see that 89% of the students believe that they will use languages when they leave school. And you can see most of them are saying for vacation and travel, future career, everyday life over on the left. And you can see over on the right that students believe, the top two tiers, that it's going to be important in their ability to find a job. Only 3% said that it may not be helpful in helping them find a job. We also took advantage of the student survey to try to get them to say something about, gee, I wish I'd started languages earlier, because the more data you can get, the more you have to show policymakers. So surely, 80% when you do the may have liked to start or would have liked to start, those two combined, 80% of the students said, yes, we wish we had been able to start language learning earlier in school. It's a good statistic for us. When we look at the life cycle of a language learner in this country, and this is nationwide now, as you know, we only have about 18% in K-6 that are having the opportunity to learn another language. By the time you get to middle school, over on the right, that number goes up to about 27–29%. So those are the numbers of students that have the opportunity by the time they get to middle school. When you jump into high school, you can see 50% in 9th grade. It goes up because there's, around the country, and remember this is nationwide, around the country, we still have that feeling that it's a 2-year to get into college kind of minimum. So when you look at the grade levels that are heavily impacted, students are trying to get those 2 years in before they leave high school, of course, so it jumps up in 10th grade, 11th grade, and then with seniors, we find that it starts to go down again, because most of them finish in the 11th grade and then many of them don't take it in their senior year. But fully 37% of those high school students said, we're going to continue in college. So we had 37%, and we've actually had some surveys that have had a higher percentage than that of students in the high school level saying, we are going to continue at the college level. Yet we look at our college numbers, and from 2009 to 2013, college enrollments dropped to 8.1%. So what is that disconnect? What is that issue where students think they're going to continue at the college level and then they end up not continuing? That's one of the issues that we will bring up in our national campaign and start to try to answer. Where is the problem? Why are students not, I mean, we all know some of the issues that are happening, but we will look into that and start in the campaign to get students more aware of why they should be continuing at the college level. So we look at New York specifically, and I don't know if you've seen Mapping the Nation. It was a project done by the Longview Foundation and the Asia Society, and it takes a look at the economic viability of a state and the reality of students learning languages or how many languages are spoken at home. So you can see that for the state of New York, the question, how global is New York? You have 30% of people speaking a language other than English at home, yet New York is the second largest exporter when it comes to states, and from 1992 to 2011, the number of jobs related to international trade increased by 115%. So those are significant numbers to bring up with policymakers, and we'll talk about the elevator speech in a little bit. So you couple that amount of economic growth in New York for international trade, and you look at the number of students actually enrolled in language classes. And for the year when this was produced, it was 30%. So they're talking about 30% in K-12 in New York learning languages. And then that dial in the middle looks at how many students are studying abroad, and it's extremely low. You can see that it's 2% for post-secondary and 1% or less than 1% for high school. So when we look at how are we preparing students, I want to talk for a minute about the idea of global competency, because we've been concerned as an organization about other organizations who will remain nameless coming out with statements about the importance of global competence and either not mentioning languages at all or putting them in a very secondary position. So ACTFL has come out with its own global competence statement, and it is on our website, and I just want to read the first paragraph. The ability to communicate with respect and cultural understanding in more than one language is an essential element of global competence. This competence is developed and demonstrated by investigating the world, recognizing and weighing perspectives, acquiring and applying disciplinary and interdisciplinary knowledge, communicating ideas, and taking action. Global competence is fundamental to the experience of learning languages, whether in classrooms, through virtual connections, or via everyday experiences. Language learning contributes an important means to communicate and interact in order to participate in multilingual communities at home and around the world. This interaction develops the disposition to explore the perspectives behind the products and practices of a culture and to value such intercultural experiences. And this is the kind of opportunity that we provide in our classrooms through Goal 5, the community's goal of the national standards. It is getting students to use the language beyond the classroom. I don't know if you know Marcus Samuelsson. He's a famous chef and restaurateur. He was born in Ethiopia, he was raised in Sweden, he lives in the US, and he was recently on CNN, and they asked him, how do you feel about living in all of these different cultures? And he said, I am very comfortable being uncomfortable. I am very comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that's a very important way to look at global competence. Our students have to go through that process of being uncomfortable in order to become comfortable eventually in the target culture. And those are the kinds of experiences that we need to give them, whether they happen virtually from our classroom, through summer programs, through travel abroad, study abroad. We need to have them have that kind of experience as part of the language learning process. And we need to have them get the word out to others about how beneficial this was. So Barb Patterson was actually talking about this yesterday in the advocacy session, and I just was following one of our former ACTFL National Language Teachers of the Year, Clarissa Adams Fletcher from Dunwoody High School in Georgia. Every year she puts out on a special Facebook page for Dunwoody alumni, what have you done with your language? And so she just was collecting, I just want to read quickly one of them. The student said, I graduated from Dunwoody in 2012. Every day I feel so fortunate that my German language education began in kindergarten in Austin Elementary and continued through Dunwoody High School and now Georgia Tech. My first experience abroad was on a 3-week exchange trip through Nuremberg, and I have been an advocate of traveling ever since. And so she has real testimony from students, and she said, this is so inspiring to younger students, and she has them read the responses. And so it's really a great way to motivate the younger students to take that step and to go beyond just what you're learning in the classroom. I also was talking to a university president several years ago, and he said, my goal for all of the students at our university is to have them have an experience where they go outside their comfort zone. And I think that is so critical because especially with social media now and students relying so heavily on their own cocoon of social connections, they don't always go outside that cocoon. And I think that is a critical experience that we need to provide for them through our language programs. So that's the thinking of our students. We're seeing that disconnect, especially between intentions to study language in college and actually doing it. And now I'm going to take it to the classroom and talk about core practices. And this is what Beth Slocum was just referring to, and she had such great contributions to our Summer Leadership Institute last summer. And so now I just want to talk about core practices. And you may have heard about this term, or you may have heard it called high leverage teaching practices, because the math field has done a lot looking at what are those classroom practices that yield the most in terms of student learning. So we in the language field have worked with some language researchers and identified what we're calling core practices. What are those core practices that we need to have all beginning teachers be able to do when they walk in the door the first day of teaching? And the definition of a core practice is an interesting one. It's a complicated teaching task that can be broken down into smaller tasks so that people can learn how to do it. But it isn't something that you can learn by observing or having modeled for you. It is a task that you have to do yourself as a teacher. And so we're going to be building professional development, webinars, other book publications around these 6 core practices so that we as a field can embrace them and work on them and see why they are so valuable. And at the same time, we need to think about teacher self-efficacy because it's related to this in a very closely connected way. And our incoming ACTFL president, Pete Swanson from Georgia State University, has done a lot of research on teacher self-efficacy. And it is the belief that teachers have that they can impact student learning. It's that simple. We have to believe that we can help students actually learn a language. I know it sounds simple, but it is something that has yielded a lot of research. Do we really have that growth mindset for our students? I'm sure you've been reading about growth mindset. It is the ability to transfer to your students the idea that they can learn the language. So that's why we have the can-do statements and all of the items that you can use to work with students to help them see how they can improve and move along the language continuum. So let's look at the first practice. I'm sure you've heard about this. Students and teachers stay in the target language at least 90% of the time in the classroom. And this, of course, is the comprehensible input. There are a lot of sessions here at this conference. You all are right on target in the sessions that you have in terms of doing this. But this is really critical. And what is holding people back? I think that some of our teachers are not at a high enough proficiency level that they can maintain this target language 90% of the time. So this is big announcement. We're going to announce it at the ACTFL convention in a couple of weeks, but we're actually going to sponsor some programs for teachers who are at the intermediate high level and want to cross that major border. That's what we call it, crossing major borders. What do you have to learn how to do to get to the advanced low so that you can deliver a standards-based program to your students, which means 90% of the time. So stay tuned for more information about that. Design communicative activities. I know all of these sound fairly simple, but you would be surprised at how few people truly understand the interpersonal mode. The interpersonal mode doesn't just mean that you have student A and student B speaking to each other. There has to be an information gap. You may do activities in class where A and B know what the answers are. That might be a skill building activity. But if you're calling it an interpersonal task, there has to be an information gap. There has to be a reason that they communicate. A doesn't know what B is going to say. So A has to listen to B, and A has to respond to the other student based on what that student says. Again, I know it sounds simple, but it is something that we will be working on to try to help people develop those skills at doing that on a regular basis in their classroom. We've all heard backward design model. Again, it sounds so simple, but how do our young teachers really start to plan and work on backward design? And it has to do with setting targets, and they have to be performance or proficiency targets. And we're having programs do that around the country. And ACTFL is putting together a task force to identify, based on your program model, how much time on task your students have had, what should their performance/proficiency levels be at certain junctures in their language learning career. And of course, we'll be sharing that. I'm sure NYSAFLT will be represented on that task force. It is very important that we set those targets, because if we don't set those targets and we don't start working toward them, you know what happens. Our textbook becomes our curriculum, becomes our day-to-day guide in the classroom, and just because students have gone through 5 chapters in a book doesn't mean they can do anything with the language. So these are the kinds of items that we will be working on in the coming years. Here's our favorite, our old friend grammar. We love that grammar. And Beth knows from the Summer Institute that, you know, this is really what we've been saying for so long, but putting it into practical classroom application is complicated, and it's difficult, and it's challenging. So again, we'll be working on this to treat grammar as a concept as students on a need-to-know basis and not making it the organizing principle of our classes. Let me know it's easy to say and more difficult to do. 5th one, present authentic cultural tasks. This is, you know, going back to the whole idea of how do you take an authentic cultural video, reading text, whatever, viewing, whatever, and help students understand it in the target language. How do you do that? Again, it's a complex task, but it's one that we need to be able to approach. And then finally, appropriate feedback. We have so much research from the very limited yet enthusiastic and passionate feedback that teachers give students. You know, muy bien, fantástico, and the student has said, see. And so we are so excited. You know, we're sympathetic interlocutors. I love that term. We are sympathetic interlocutors. We can make sense of anything that our students say because we want so much to understand them. And we can. It doesn't matter what they say. We can understand them. And we want to reward them. So we praise them. And it might be 1-word, 2-word answer. Yet we're praising them. And they're thinking, hey, I made her happy. I made him happy. They're excited. I don't have to do any more. So this really looks at how do you give feedback that elicits, that gets them, that draws them out, that gets them to do more with the language. Because that's the only way they're going to move up the spectrum. That's the only way they're going to get better. So those are the 6 core practices. You can expect to see more of these, but I think looking at these as the 6 essential practices that all language teachers need to know walking in that door on the first day, I think will help guide us in terms of our professional development. I want to say a little bit about our role as advocates, because it's really interesting. If you ask language teachers, as we did on this high school survey, these are high school language teachers, 92% agreed that advocacy was part of their job. When we developed the teacher education standards, the CAPE, it used to be NCAPE and now it's CAPE, the Council for Accreditation of Educator Preparation, there is a strand that talks about professionalism, and part of that is how do you teach teacher candidates to be able to advocate for languages. Important part of teacher education. And finally, National Board for Professional Teaching Standards has a strand on advocacy, because for accomplished teachers, the National Board feels, especially in languages now, math doesn't have advocacy. I mean, they don't need it, but language teachers do. So it is part of our effort there. And then finally, we just did an ACTFL member survey, and remember, ACTFL members are half higher ed and half K-12, and we got 52.3% of ACTFL members who said that advocacy was definitely part of their job. So I think as a profession, we agree that we need to know how to advocate. So the question, as you know, is how do we do that? So as Diana said, we've set up state advocacy teams, and of course NYSAFLT already had a committee, so that was easy. And we work with them, and they establish their own goals. This isn't something that ACTFL imposes on them. They establish their own goals at our delegate assembly every year at the ACTFL convention. And I just wanted to quickly go over them because I do have some updates that I think are important for everyone. Getting a proclamation out of your governor or whatever, maybe when we launch the Lead with Languages. Okay, I have a big confession. This is really big. In 2000, I can't even say it. In 2003, when I was ACTFL president, the keynoter was Andrew Cuomo. Now I am going to get a right side. No, seriously, guys, his wife had just left him, and seriously, she ran off with a polo player, and he was on the speaking circuit, and we had worked with his mother, Matilda Cuomo, who was very supportive, and his sister, she was very supportive of Italian language. We had worked with them, and he was available, and he was, I don't know if anybody was there, it was in Philadelphia, but he was a very good speaker, and I had a long talk with him ahead of time, and he was good, but I know he kind of went south after that. So, proclamation doesn't have to be from the governor, it could be from someone else. I'll call him up again. Hey, remember me? Arrange a meeting with a state legislator, not just in Washington, D.C., but here in New York as well. We just had our ACTFL president, Jackie Van Houten, do this in the Kentucky 3rd District. She met with her legislator. He was so impressed. He's already signed on to the World Language Advancement Act as a co-sponsor, and he's going to go visit an immersion program in his district. And that's the kind of those are the kinds of contacts and the kind of activity that really can yield some good results. So all the state teams are working very hard on that. State supervisor, you're good in that direction, but about 20 of our states don't have anyone at their Department of Ed that is responsible for languages. So those states are working on that. Lobby state legislatures to provide stipends for national board. And this is what I wanted to talk about because we are going to make a big announcement in 2 weeks. We have been working with the national board for the last 12 years to expand certification beyond French and Spanish at the secondary level. In 2017, 2018, they will expand certifications. It's probably going to only be 4 new languages a year or 2 new languages a year, but they will start to expand back to German and Latin, on to Japanese and Chinese, Russian. They're going to be very inclusive, but this has been a struggle because they have been suffering from funding issues as well. But we're very excited that certification will be expanded beyond French and Spanish. Encourage promotion of early language learning. You have a lot going on here in this state with dual language programs, at least in New York City. Develop pre-K 16 agreements to establish policies for secondary to post-secondary transition. And I'm glad Marcia Arndt's in the audience from the College Board because we found that 11 states actually have recommendations that their state universities do general acceptance of an AP score for credit at the university. And you know how challenging that is when your students come back and say, I took the AP test, I got a 4 or 5 and I didn't get any credit. Some states actually have policies where the state universities have to give the same number of credits. So that's something to really consider working toward because that really benefits the students in the end. Develop a Teacher of the Year program. I know that you have one. You've had wonderful candidates, but you need to use those Teachers of the Year to get in to have meetings. Every year, for better or for worse, we meet with Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education, who's now leaving, but we take our Teacher of the Year at the national level and we have a photo op with him. It's a small amount of time, but we get to talk to him about language policy, and you can do it with any number of elected officials, school board members, anyone. You can take the Teacher of the Year. They always get in the door for a meeting. It's a great advocacy effort. Work to educate candidates running for office. Even before they get into office, find out where they stand on this, and if they don't have a position, inform them and make sure they understand. Now, we haven't started working on Donald Trump yet. Hopefully. But anyway, we will, once the candidates are recognized by each party, we will start working with them to see where they stand on that. High school graduation requirement, only about 16 of our states have any kind of high school graduation requirement, believe it or not, so that's a big issue to work on. And then finally, biliteracy seal, you have it in New York, you were the second state to adopt it. It is spreading like wildfire, and people are really engaged in it now. This is the exciting part. We worked really hard last year with Congress and with JNCL, the Joint National Committee for Languages, and we got Congress to commission a study by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. It will come out in September of 2016, and it's going to look at our nation's language capacity vis-a-vis our economic viability, global security, personal benefits, all aspects of languages, and make certain recommendations. And so we're very pleased that ACTFL is represented on the commission, that MLA is on the commission. There are other prominent fellows from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. There has not been a study like this since 1979. We have to have strong recommendations that Congress will then act on, that businesses will act on, that people will take action. So the encouraging thing is we had 4 members of the Senate sign on, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. So you can see Brian Schatz, Democrat, and Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin in the Senate side, and then Orrin Hatch and Mark Kirk on the Republican side, and same thing in the House. We had David Price from North Carolina, who's been a very strong advocate, and Rush Holt is no longer in office, but we're building some new champions. We have worked with Kirsten Gillibrand. She's on our honorary council for Lead with Languages, so we're very pleased with the New York response, and we're building new champions, as I said. So we're going to launch the Lead with Languages campaign. We have been raising funds and building toward this for the past few years, but we have been asked to coordinate it with the report release from AAAS, so it'll be a double whammy. It'll be the report coming out, and instead of just sitting on the shelf, we'll launch the National Public Awareness Campaign and hopefully change minds. We want to start a national movement, a conversation, a public conversation about the importance of languages. So it'll be a fully integrated national campaign. Our objectives are to increase language programs, increase enrollment, expand funding for programs, engage business leaders, and make sure that everyone is a part of the conversation, that businesses are starting to speak up for languages. I have interesting information. We have another disconnect with business. I don't think I have to tell you all that. We've been having trouble getting businesses to speak up for languages. And what we're finding out as we dig deeper, and we will be in getting some data for the campaign, is that they are reluctant to put a need for a language when they advertise a position because they know they cannot find that person. So they don't put it on. So right now, in the business community, for the most part, Languages are nice to have, but they're not going to put it on as an essential requirement. But I have two stories that are really important. Chiquita Brand International had its headquarters in Cincinnati, and they announced to the Cincinnati mayor and the city council that they were leaving and they were going to relocate in Charlotte, North Carolina. And they gave 3 reasons. The top reason was a lot of flights had been cut into Cincinnati, and that's a practical thing. They couldn't get people there because there were just fewer flights. I think it used to be a US Air hub or something, and so they had fewer flights. The second one is they weren't finding an international mindset in the city of Cincinnati, and they couldn't find a multilingual workforce. So they said, we're going to Charlotte, North Carolina, where we can find those. The other story is out of the state of Delaware. They had Cigna Insurance Company, an international company, and they said, you know, we're trying to decide whether to keep our corporate headquarters here in Delaware or move to Brussels and Belgium. And they finally decided to move to Belgium. And they said to the governor, we're not staying in Delaware because we can't find a multilingual workforce. So what did the governor of Delaware do? You all probably know. He pumped a lot of money into dual language elementary programs. And they are growing a multilingual workforce in Delaware. And that was the result. And so is Utah, by the way, if you hadn't heard about the Utah program. So we do have evidence that businesses are starting to wake up and realize that they need to have these skills and they need to make it public. And this is going to be very much a part of the campaign, the business need. So I'll share this PowerPoint with John, and you can see some of the statistics here about the big need, especially in small and medium-sized businesses. They have said flat out they can't expand internationally because they don't have the language capabilities. So it's a good message for students. And if you haven't seen this issue of the Language Educator, I have some at the ACTFL booth, but on page 9 you can actually pull out a poster to use in your classroom. And what it is the proficiency levels, a description of the proficiency level, and then the positions that require that level of proficiency. And this is all based on Language Testing International, which does all of the ACTFL testing. And these are specific positions that employers said, we want advanced low for this position, we want superior for this position. And guess what, guys? No jobs at novice level. And no jobs at intermediate low. And so this is an important message for your students. So please stop by the booth and pick one up so you can have some more ammunition for your classes. I'm going to play a video in a minute, and it talks about this whole myth that English is enough, because we hear that often. Oh, everybody speaks English, and they really don't. And if they do speak English, it's at a very, very low proficiency level. That is really a myth. Here are all the jobs. It doesn't matter what field your students are going into. Languages are going to be critical. We have celebrities that will be doing public service announcements for the campaign. Mario Batali, Catherine Bell, Esperanza Spalding are just a few. We also have Andrew Luck, the quarterback for the Colts. He speaks German. He's very supportive of this. So I know we got to get some New York teams. They can help us with that. We have an honorary council that has the mayor of Philadelphia, the governor of Delaware, Leon Panetta, John Huntsman, whom you know as ambassador to China and governor of Utah, Kirsten Gillibrand, as I mentioned, a lot of passionate supporters. We're going to be asking people to take action. So I'm going to play the video, but everybody needs their elevator speech. So you have 30 seconds to convince someone or tell someone something, whether it's at a party, a backyard barbecue, and a real elevator. I just heard they did an entrepreneur contest, and they actually put the candidates in an elevator and made them sell their product, in 30 seconds. But we need to have those data. So I did one for New York. U.S. businesses consistently report that a lack of bilingual employees is impeding their ability to grow their companies. In the last 20 years, There has been a 115% increase in jobs in New York tied to international trade. New York ranks second among the states in exports, yet only 30% of K-12 students in New York are studying a second language. So we desperately need your support for increasing language education in the state of New York, or whatever issue you're working on. And I know you have a few you're working on. So I'm just going to play the video, and it's at language.
Imagine waking up one day to a new reality. A world where English is only one of thousands of languages, and 90% of Americans are left out of the conversation. Realize that that day is today. In the world we share with 7 billion people, 75% don't understand any English, and the fastest growing economies across the globe are non-English speaking. How can we succeed in commerce, in diplomacy, and in our careers in today's multilingual and multicultural world? With languages. Learning other languages is essential for America. Language competency equips our workforce for a competitive job market. It opens the doors for businesses of every size to connect with the 95% of the world's customers who live outside our borders. And in an era of increased global challenges and conflicts, it empowers our diplomatic, military, and intelligence communities to be effective in their missions. Outside the US, knowing multiple languages is the standard, not the exception. Time to wake up and lead ourselves from today to tomorrow with languages. Let's make languages a national priority to prepare Americans for a brighter future in a more connected world.
The video is at leadwithlanguages.org. Please use it, please show it. ACTFL looks forward to working with NYSAFLT on starting the conversation and starting this movement. Thank you so much for inviting me.